Welcome back to the Getting Started with GDPR Compliance series. I'm Thielova, Global DPO at OneTrust. In this video, we'll dive into what constitutes a valid consent for processing of personal data under the GDPR and the conditions for collecting valid consent for cookies. The GDPR sets out strict guidelines that organizations must follow to capture valid consent as a legal basis for processing personal data. If you're planning on relying on consent as your legal basis for processing, here are some of the questions you should be asking yourself before proceeding. Did you provide the individual with clear and concise information about what personal data will be collected, how it will be used, the purposes of processing, and who it will be shared with? Was this information easily understandable and accessible to the individual? Was the consent given actively, meaning that the individual must actively agree to their personal data being collected and processed? This can be in the form of a signature, ticking a box, or another affirmative action. Was the consent given for specific data and specific purposes? For example, an individual may agree to their health data being used for medical research purposes, but they may not agree to it being shared with a third party for marketing purposes. Did you offer the data subject the option to withdraw their consent? And if so, can you honor that withdrawal of consent and communicate that change of preferences to vendors and other third parties downstream? If you answered yes to all of these questions, your consent is likely to be seen as valid under the GDPR. However, if you answered no to any of these questions, you will need to revisit how you collect consent to ensure that it is valid under the GDPR. Cookies are small text files which are placed on a user's device by a website. They're often used to track user behavior and to personalize their browsing experience. Under the GDPR, consent for cookies and other similar tracking technologies must be obtained before they are placed on a user's device. Although there are some exceptions to this rule. Website operators must inform the user when trackers are placed on their devices and what the tracker will be used for. The user must actively agree before trackers are placed, and strict conditions for obtaining that valid consent must be met. Consent is usually obtained through a cookie banner, which can cause businesses a headache with how to communicate large quantities of technical information in a clear and accessible way to the user, while allowing that individual to give informed consent. Different regulators across the EU have released guidance on this issue, and they have outlined various requirements for obtaining valid cookie consent within different EU member states. The bottom line: consent is one of the most commonly used legal bases for processing of personal data under the GDPR, and ensuring that consent is valid should be a high priority for organizations that are new to the regulation. Remember, valid consent must be free, explicit, informed, accessible, specific, and withdrawable. And when in doubt, consult regional guidance on valid consent. Keep watching the Getting Started with GDPR Compliance series to learn more about processing of sensitive data, records of processing activities, and data transfers.